The Consumer Price Index, or what's called the CPI, is an inflation measure and is equal to the percent of change in the CPI between 2 years. Now, as we work this problem, keep in mind they're telling us that the CPI is a percent of change, and we've learned about that formula, so just keep that in the back of your mind. They're asking us a couple of questions. The first question is this: what was the inflation rate from 1950 to 1990? Now, this chart gives you some values from 1950 and also some values from 1990. So we'll be using the first bar and the last bar in this work. As I said, they're telling us that the CPI is a percent of change. So you know, or you should know, that you're going to be using a rate of a percent of increase. In this case, it's going up, a percent of increase formula. And remember, we've covered this before. When you have a percent of increase, it's always going to be the new value minus the old value over the old value. And they're telling us that the Consumer Price Index is an inflation measure, so they want us to use the rate of change formula to calculate the inflation rate based on CPI. Well, the new CPI, they're talking about from 1990 to 1950, or 1950 to 1990. So the new CPI is the 1990 CPI, and that's where we're going to need that number, the 215.4, and that will go here. And then we'll need the 1950 CPI value. So that number, 37.4, will go here, but it also goes here. Well, once you figure that out, that you're using percent increase formula, it all falls into place pretty easily. So what you find out by doing this calculation is that the inflation rate is the 1990 CPI, which is 215.4, minus the 1950 CPI, which is 37.4, divided by the 1950 CPI, which is 37.4. Now, I didn't put the calculator up this time because there's so much information on the screen. I just didn't want to make the distraction, but I assume that you'll be able to do this calculation without any trouble by yourself. If you subtract 215.4 minus 37.4, you actually get 178 even, divided by 37.4, and when all is said and done, you end up with 4.75936, and actually you could keep going if you wanted to. And the main thing that I would tell you is make sure that you take enough decimal places that you're pretty sure when you get through and round you won't have lost accuracy. So, you know, if you said, well, maybe that's not enough, maybe I want to take a little bit more, if you actually look into your calculator, that was really 9358289. You could probably get by with rounding it off where I rounded originally. My main point is, if there's any doubt, go further, because you're going to be wrong in the end if you round too much, too severely, too early. Also remember that when you divide, you're getting a decimal. They want the inflation rate as a percent. This is a decimal. Remember, that's a decimal. When you do the division, you get a decimal. So if you want to actually write that as a percent, you've got to move the decimal place 2 places to the right. So that's actually 475.9358289, and then you have to look at how they wanted it rounded. They said to round it to 1 decimal place, but it's after you've changed it to a percent, so you got to be really careful. You had to take enough so that you could at least round to here after you converted it to a decimal. Well, it's easy to see now that that 3 leaves the 9 as it is, so to the nearest percent that would be 475.9%. So you have to be really careful. You have to carry enough decimal places to keep your accuracy after you change it to percent, and then you have to round the answer as you're asked to round it. Now that's the first question. They also ask a second question. The second question says, if a pair of sneakers cost $38 in 1950, use the CPI to estimate the cost in 1990. And then it says use the unrounded value from part A, but round the final answer to the nearest cent. And that's just a lesson that you'll learn as you do things. When you're doing intermediate calculations, you want to use, I say unrounded values, but at least rounded values to round it to plenty of decimal places so you don't lose your final accuracy. So since they wanted us to use that answer from part A before we rounded it off, I'll remind you what it was. That inflation rate that we calculated earlier, and if you don't remember, you can look back. That's what we got before we rounded, and that's what they want us to use. The second thing I would mention is the percent change in price from 1950 to 1990 is just that inflation rate from part A. So they ask us to calculate the inflation rate in point A so that we could use it in point B, or excuse me, in part B. So what they're saying is the percent change is the inflation rate. So the inflation rate from part A, and when we're using the calculation, we want to use the decimal value of it. That unrounded value is going to go there. So if I want to find out, based on the CPI from that graph, if I want to see about what a pair of sneakers would cost in 1990 that cost $38 in 1950, then all I would do is take the inflation rate that I calculated from A, take the 1950 cost of the sneakers, and plug it in here and here, and then solve for the estimated cost in 1990. So let's just call that X. Let's say we're going to call that X. Then what we would get is X minus the cost in 1950 is 38 divided by the cost in 1950 is 38. Remember, all of this is just a percent increase, and then that's equal to, as I said, the inflation rate that we got from part A, and they want us to use the unrounded version, so that'd be 4.759358. So we want to solve for X. Well, I mean, that might look a little hard, but really it's not. If you think of that as a fraction, you can cross multiply, and I'll move over here to give myself more room. So I can take X minus 38 times 1 is just X minus 38 equal, and then I get 38 times 4.75. And remember, you're using the unrounded inflation rate from part A. So now I want to multiply the right hand side. Again, I'm not going to bring out the calculator here. I'll trust that you can do that. But when you do that, you'll end up with 180.855615. And then if I add 38 to both sides, I'll have X. So I want to add 38 to 180, and again, I just do that on the calculator. I've already got the 180 in there, so I just say plus 38 equals, and I'll end up with $218. And they said to round it off to the nearest cent. That 5, that's the nearest cent. That 5 is going to make it go up to a 6, so it's going to be 86 cents. So based on the CPI in that chart, a $38 pair of sneakers in 1950, you would expect them to cost around $218.86 in 1990.